It all began on a cold autumn afternoon, when the family decided to visit the quaint little toy store at the end of town. The air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under their feet as they approached the store, the girls' excited chatter filling the silence. Inside, the shelves were stacked with dolls of all shapes and sizes. Soft ones, porcelain ones, even handmade rag dolls with delicate embroidered faces. But one doll caught her eye immediately. It was the most exquisite glass doll she'd ever seen. It had pale, translucent skin that gleamed in the dim light, giving it an ethereal, almost ghostly look. Its glass blue eyes sparkled, framed by dark lashes and delicate brows painted with intricate detail. The doll wore a deep red velvet dress trimmed with lace, and its lips were a deep crimson. The girl stared, captivated by the doll's beauty. There was something mesmerizing about it, as if it was calling to her. "Daddy, can I have this one? Please," she asked, clutching the doll in her small hands. Her father studied the doll, his expression growing uneasy. For a brief moment, he thought he saw the doll's glass eyes flash a shade of red, a flicker so quick that he dismissed it as a trick of the light. But a shiver crept down his spine, and he instinctively pulled the doll from his daughter's hands and placed it back on the shelf. "I don't like the look of this doll," he said, shaking his head. "Something about it feels wrong." But the girl was insistent. She stomped her feet, her voice rising with frustration. "I want this doll. I want it." Her mother, not wanting to cause a scene, sighed and gave in. She picked up the doll and handed it to her daughter with a soft smile, ignoring the unease in her husband's gaze. The father said nothing more, but as they left the shop, he felt a growing dread that he couldn't shake. That evening, as they returned home, the father remained quiet, his mind consumed by thoughts of the doll. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a deep-seated anxiety every time he looked at it. Perhaps it was just a protective instinct, or maybe he was overreacting. Yet, something about the doll's face seemed almost alive. The way its eyes followed his daughter around the room made him feel uneasy. As he packed his bags for an overnight business trip, he stopped by his daughter's room and found her happily playing with the glass doll, brushing its hair and murmuring secrets to it as if it were a dear friend. He swallowed his discomfort and leaned down, patting her shoulder. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle but serious, "please don't leave the doll in your room at night." The girl looked up, her face confused. "Why not, Daddy?" "Just trust me," he replied, glancing nervously at the doll's glassy gaze. "It's not safe." She shrugged and nodded, though she clearly didn't understand. "Okay, Daddy," she whispered, promising to keep the doll in another room at night. With that, he kissed her on the forehead and left for his trip, hoping that his strange feeling would fade with distance. But as he drove away, he couldn't shake the image of the doll's eyes, the brief, unsettling red gleam that seemed to pulse whenever he looked away. Despite her father's warning, the girl couldn't bring herself to leave her new doll in the living room. She adored it. Its delicate face and haunting eyes filled her with wonder. So, that night, just as her parents had gone to bed, she placed the doll on the small table beside her bed and drifted off to sleep. The room was quiet, the faint glow of the streetlight casting shadows across her walls. Hours passed in silence, and then, a sound. A faint, shuffling noise echoed in the darkness. The girl's eyes fluttered open, and she froze, staring at the shadows on the wall. Her heart pounded in her chest as she sat up, straining to listen. It was then she noticed the eyes. A pair of red, glowing eyes were staring at her from across the room. She blinked, rubbing her eyes, convinced it was a trick of the darkness. But when she opened her eyes again, the red glow was closer, filling the room with an ominous light. The girl pulled the blanket up to her chin, trembling as the eyes crept closer and closer. She could barely breathe, her pulse racing with terror. The doll's glassy, red-tinged gaze locked onto her, and it seemed to smile, a cold, cruel smile. Then a whisper. "Lie down on your pillow," the doll murmured, its voice soft yet chilling. "I promise I won't strangle you." The girl's eyes widened, her throat tight with fear. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body felt paralyzed, trapped under the weight of those haunting eyes. Against her will, she slowly lay back down, her head sinking into the pillow. As soon as she did, she felt a cold, delicate pressure wrap around her neck. The doll's glass hands were on her throat, pressing down, tightening. She gasped, struggling, but the pressure only grew stronger. The last thing she saw was the doll's wicked, glassy smile, illuminated by the glow of her fading breath. The next morning, the girl's mother walked into her room, humming softly as she prepared to wake her daughter. But as soon as she entered, she froze, horror gripping her heart. Her daughter lay still, her face pale, her eyes wide and vacant, her small hands limp by her sides. Between her tiny fingers, the mother saw fragments of glass, small, delicate shards that glittered in the morning light. The glass doll sat beside her, its head cocked to one side, a cruel smile etched on its painted face. "No, no," the mother whispered, tears streaming down her face as she gathered her daughter's body into her arms, cradling her as if she could somehow bring her back to life. And then she heard it, a faint, chilling whisper, like the rustling of dead leaves. "Lie down next to your daughter," the doll murmured, its red eyes flickering. "I promise I won't strangle you." The mother's tears fell in silent rivers as she lay down beside her daughter, her body numb, her heart broken. She didn't care anymore. She just wanted to hold her baby, even if it meant joining her in the darkness. As soon as her head touched the pillow, she felt the cold, brittle fingers of the glass doll wrap around her throat. The pressure was relentless, and the last thing she heard was the doll's soft, mocking laughter as it squeezed the life from her. When the girl's father returned from his business trip that evening, he called out to his wife and daughter, his voice echoing through the silent house. There was no answer, just an eerie stillness that made his skin crawl. He climbed the stairs and entered his daughter's room, his heart pounding with dread. What he saw made his blood run cold. There, on the bed, lay his wife and daughter, both pale and lifeless, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. And between them, perched on the edge of the bed, was the glass doll, its eyes blazing red, a twisted smile on its perfect, painted lips. The father's horror turned to fury. He snatched the doll, hurling it to the ground. It shattered with a sickening crack, fragments of glass scattering across the floor. But as he looked down at the broken pieces, he felt no relief. The laughter, soft and mocking, still echoed in his mind. And in the shadows of the room, a pair of red eyes blinked open, watching him with silent, malevolent glee. For weeks after, he could hear it, the soft, sinister whisper that haunted his every step. "I'm broken now, Daddy. But I promise I'm not gone." And somewhere in the darkness, the remnants of the glass doll waited, biding their time. In the days following the tragic deaths of his wife and daughter, the father moved through life in a numb haze. Friends and family members expressed their condolences, but no words could penetrate the darkness that now filled his heart. He could hardly bring himself to sleep in the house where his family had been taken from him, but he felt rooted to the spot, unwilling to leave the place where he had last seen them alive. Despite smashing the glass doll into countless fragments, he couldn't escape the sense that it hadn't truly been destroyed. Even when he swept up every shard, sealed them in a box, and buried them deep in the backyard, he couldn't shake the feeling of something sinister lurking in the house. And then one night, he heard it, a faint, tinkling sound, like glass rattling together. It was subtle, just on the edge of hearing, but it was enough to pull him from his restless sleep. He rose, shivering as he walked down the hallway, following the sound. It led him back to his daughter's room, the very room where the tragedy had taken place. His hands trembled as he opened the door, half expecting to see that cursed glass doll waiting for him on the bed. But there was nothing, just the empty room, bathed in shadows. He sighed with relief, almost laughing at his own paranoia. But as he turned to leave, he froze. The floor creaked behind him, and in the dim light, he saw something glinting in the corner. A tiny shard of glass, catching the moonlight. He leaned down to pick it up, his fingers brushing the cold, sharp edge. That's when he heard the voice. "I'm still here, Daddy," it whispered, the tone high and childlike, but laced with something dark and malevolent. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the room like an icy fog. His heart pounding, he stumbled back, clutching the shard in his hand. He could feel it pulsing, as if it had a life of its own. The doll was not gone. The father's life quickly unraveled as he became haunted by the relentless presence of the glass doll. No matter where he went in the house, he would find shards of glass in the most unexpected places. A sliver of glass on his pillow, another in his coat pocket, and once, even a tiny fragment in his food. Each time he found a piece, the same voice would echo in his mind, faint and mocking. "You can't get rid of me. I'm with you always." He grew increasingly paranoid, jumping at every small sound. He isolated himself, refusing to see friends or family, consumed by the need to rid himself of this curse. He tried everything he could think of, burning the shards, throwing them into the river, even scattering them in different places around town. But no matter what he did, the pieces always found their way back. One evening, exhausted and desperate, he broke down and wept, pleading with the invisible force to leave him in peace. As he sat on the floor, his head in his hands, he heard footsteps, soft, delicate footsteps, like those of a child, creeping down the hallway toward him. He looked up, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure made entirely of glass shards, pieced together into a grotesque form that vaguely resembled the doll. Its eyes glowed red, the same demonic glint he had seen in the doll that night. "Daddy," it whispered, taking a step closer. The figure shattered into countless fragments, scattering across the room like a deadly rain of glass. He shielded his face, the tiny shards biting into his skin, leaving small, stinging cuts. And when he opened his eyes, the shards had vanished, leaving only the blood on his arms and face as evidence. He knew, then, that there was no escaping the doll's curse. It was a part of him now. Driven to the brink of madness, the father decided to seek answers. He returned to the toy store where his daughter had chosen the doll, hoping the shopkeeper could shed some light on the strange events that had befallen him. The store was eerily quiet, and as he stepped inside, he felt a chill run down his spine. The shelves were filled with an array of dolls, each one more lifeless than the last, their glassy eyes staring blankly into space. It was as if they were all watching him, silently judging. The elderly shopkeeper emerged from the shadows, his face wrinkled and his eyes shrewd. "I was wondering when you would come," he said, his voice carrying a hint of foreboding. The father explained everything, the doll, the strange occurrences, the terrible deaths. He begged the shopkeeper for answers, desperate to understand why this had happened. The shopkeeper sighed, nodding slowly. "The glass doll is not an ordinary toy. It's bound by a curse, a spirit trapped within, seeking revenge on anyone who dares to bring it home. They say the spirit was once a child, abandoned and forgotten, and so, it latches onto those who ignore its warnings." The father shuddered, realizing with horror that his daughter's innocent desire for the doll had led to this curse. "Is there any way to break it?" he asked, his voice a whisper. The shopkeeper's expression darkened. "Once it's claimed a life, the doll cannot be rid of. The spirit becomes tied to those left behind, feeding on their grief and guilt. It won't rest until it's taken everyone in its grasp." The father stumbled back, the weight of the words crushing him. He had brought this horror into his life, and now it was set on destroying him too. But he wasn't ready to give up. If there was even a sliver of hope, he would find it. He left the shop, his mind swirling with a mix of despair and determination. Determined to end the curse, the father returned home with a plan. He would confront the spirit directly, face it, and demand it release him. He set up mirrors around the room, placing shards of the cursed glass in a circle, hoping to trap the spirit within. As night fell, he waited, sitting in the center of the circle with his heart pounding in his chest. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, summoning the spirit. "Come out. I know you're here," he called, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. "I'm the one you want. Let my family rest. Let them be free. The room grew cold, and the shadows seemed to thicken around him. Slowly, he opened his eyes, and there, in the reflection of each mirror, he saw the doll's face, smiling with its red eyes glowing in the darkness. The doll's voice filled the room, low and chilling. You can't free them. They are mine just as you are. You brought me into your life, and now you will live with me forever. The father gritted his teeth, fighting back tears of rage and despair. Why? Why do you do this? They were innocent. They ignored me. The voice hissed, bitter and angry. I was abandoned once, forgotten, and now I make sure no one forgets me. You are just the latest in a long line, and you will suffer as I suffered. Desperate, the father grabbed one of the mirrors and hurled it at the apparition. The glass shattered, and for a brief moment, the doll's image flickered, a scream tearing through the air as the pieces hit the ground. But it wasn't enough. The red glow intensified, filling the room as the spirit howled in fury. With nowhere left to turn, the father realized that there was only one way to end the curse. The spirit needed to be remembered, acknowledged, appeased in some way. If he could channel his own grief, his own loss, maybe he could find peace for both himself and the spirit. He gathered the remaining shards of the glass doll, carefully piecing them back together. With each piece, he whispered a memory of his daughter, pouring his love and sorrow into the broken doll. When he was done, the doll sat whole once more, albeit cracked and damaged. He placed it in the center of his daughter's room, lighting a single candle beside it. I remember you, he said softly, his voice filled with both sorrow and understanding. I remember your pain. You won't be forgotten. For a long time there was only silence. The red glow in the doll's eyes softened, fading to a gentle, dim light. And then, with a final sigh, the doll's eyes closed, the spirit's presence finally dissipating. The room grew warm once more, and the house seemed to release a long-held breath. The father collapsed to his knees, relief washing over him. The curse had lifted. His family could rest, and so could he. But he knew he would never be the same. The glass doll had taken everything from him, his family, his peace, his innocence. And though the curse was broken, the memory of those red, glowing eyes would haunt him forever. In the end, he buried the doll in his backyard, placing a small stone to mark its grave. And every night, as he lay in bed, he thought he heard a faint whisper in the darkness, reminding him that some spirits never truly rest.